Forms of market totalism. There are 5 forms of market domination that constitute the substance of my argument that consumer culture has a totalizing, although not totalitarian, impact on our lives. I will argue that the consumer market is ubiquitous, it is everywhere, that it is omnipresent, it is all the time and aspires to fill up all time, it is addictive, it creates its own forms of reinforcement, it is self-replicating, it spreads virally, and it is omnilegitimate. It engages in active self-rationalization and self-justification, eroding the moral basis for resisting it. Together, these 5 characteristics give markets a power over our lives and thoughts, bodies and souls, that rival but are not the equivalent of more traditional forms of totalitarianism. Yet although they are less toxic because they operate under the putative legitimacy of market freedom and depend on civic schizophrenia for their success, they are the more difficult to resist and overcome. Their dangers, above all, the loss of genuine diversity in a marketplace which, although pluralistic, monopolizes consciousness, become apparent as these characteristics are elaborated and documented. 1. Ubiquity. In the traditional liberal view of society, life offers many discrete spheres of activity for human beings whose values, cultures, and life purposes are historically plural and empirically diverse. Pluralism is a fact rather than an aspiration. In surveying the spheres in which justice might play a role, for example, political theorist Michael Walzer gave us a representative typology which considered not only the marketplace defined by money and commodities, but other spheres, each with its own values and goods, defined by merit, office in the ancient sense, by work, workplace, by leisure, recreation, by education, school place, by kinship and love, family or home, by divine grace, religion, by respect and recognition, friendship, and by politics, public or civic space. Like other liberal Lockean thinkers upholding a fundamentally pluralist conception of goods, Walzer wished to describe and justify a society where no social good serves or can serve as a means of domination. That is to say, Walzer gave the fact of human pluralism a prescriptive thrust, arguing that there is no single set of primary or basic goods conceivable across all moral and material worlds. Now, as a theory, private marketplace philosophy shares this commitment to pluralism and variety. Those who propound the virtues of the market boast of its openness to pluralism, courtesy of competition, especially as compared to the state's defining monopoly over force and law. Yet the liberal democratic state employs its monopoly over legitimate force to assure a pluralism of spheres and the sanctity of individual rights and of the domain of privacy rights. While the consumer marketplace tends to colonize every sphere and sector, even though it maintains the fiction of pluralism. Although it does not initially make a moral claim for its omnipresence by aspiring to occupy every space and all spaces, it effectively precludes the possibility of coeval spheres of human activity. Commercializing capitalism mandates the infiltration and permeation of non-commercial spheres in order to maximize profitability. It is quite literally everywhere, colonizing every life sphere in which we live out our daily routines. On sidewalks, and walls, and buses, and trains, in schoolrooms and bedrooms and restrooms and trams, on big screens and pod screens, and TVs and phones, carved into haircuts and written on our skin, codified as trademarks and brand marks and love marks, ciphers for human identity consumed by desire, a spirit perfectly captured by the New York Times in the title of a book review of a philosophical study of desire. I am, therefore I want. Ubiquity is a powerful term, but as with so many ideas examined here, it is not my coinage but that of the marketeers. A journalist surveying telecommunication conglomerates introduces a story on MTV networks under the title, I want my ubiquitous conglomerate. His ubiquitous conglomerate, which is itself a subsidiary of the still more elephantine Viacom, includes MTV, MTV2, Nickelodeon, Comedy Central, TV Land, and Spike in the United States, and 111 channels around the world, including 19 brand new channels in Europe, Asia, Latin America, and Africa. The question posed by this newsman story is, once you are everywhere, where do you go next? Meanwhile, Newsweek takes note of the new competition for small-screen television on cell phones and iPods by shouting, only one thing is clear. The race is on toward Ubiquity. A recent advertising campaign slogan for Samsung's new cell phone television portrays Ubiquity as a privatization of public space. We watch a variety of people, nominally in public, turn their spaces into privatized viewing rooms for their handheld Samsung mini screens, while a tagline urges us to imagine the world as your living room. The annihilation of public space, a feature of many of the new technologies from cell phones and Blackberries to video games and global positioning auto maps, no more turning to the public to ask directions, has become a virtue among privatized consumers for whom the presence of public others is a distraction from consuming private behavior. The only thing quasi-public that follows you into the privatized sanctuaries that the gadgets carve out of the public husk is commerce itself, since the wormholes through which you must travel in making your escape must always be purchased. What is public, trees, wind, architecture, sounds, other people, is free. Commercially supported solitude must be bought, which is of course the point. Those seeking the sanctuary of electronic screens and headphones may imagine themselves seeking out the diversity of what is offered in games, films, and music, and eluding the sameness of the outside world. Yet, bought electronic content is far more homogeneous and limiting than the actual pluralism of our natural life worlds, even if for some people it also feels more vivid and real. At their best, movies cannot be more heterogeneous and varied than the real worlds they aspire to capture. All of Hollywood at its best is not the equal in variety or originality of a single summer's day walk in a public park. Art originates its own varied worlds, of course, and this discussion of public diversity is not intended as a comment on the aesthetic. It is a variety in the literal sense with which I am concerned, actual variations in experience and diversity of life spheres, not pluralism within, but pluralism among the many sectors in which we think, feel, work, and live. It is this kind of variety that public space guarantees and which markets shrink. For everyone ends up watching the same selection of programs offered them by the same ubiquitous conglomerates, sponsored by the same consumer companies aiming at dominating the electronic markets. In France, consumers have discovered it is not the market that assures cultural variety in television programming, or rescues the movie industry from the scourge of Ubiquity. It is instead the state telecommunications quasi-monopoly over television that does so. Though market-obsessed Americans will rush to call such state intervention Orwellian, the French recognize that a state-sponsored rule that prohibits the showing of films on public television on Wednesdays and Saturday evenings, the primary movie attendance nights, is what secures the balance between movie attendance and television watching, and yes, through coercion, generates greater variety in French cultural life. It is likewise the state in France that subjects American films to import quotas, as if they were vegetables, Hollywood complains, not to prevent French audiences from being exposed to American pop culture, but to salvage a little space for French culture, pop or otherwise, in the face of the American market onslaught, which, if the market alone prevailed, would mean that French audiences would be exposed to nothing but American films, TV, and pop culture. Alone among its allies, other than Israel, the United States opposed the 2005 UNESCO Convention on Cultural Diversity, because it insisted and insists that the free market is a better vehicle for global cultural diversity than transnational regulation. Yet the global marketplace has facilitated an asymmetry in cultural power in which the United States, Hollywood, dominates. French Cultural Minister Renaud Donadieu de Vabre defended the convention by noting that Hollywood movies account for 85% of movie tickets sold around the world. In the United States, only 1% of shown movies come from outside the United States. Does the United States defend the market mechanism, then, because it assures diversity, or because it assures American cultural dominion and the ubiquity of its commercial products? Ubiquity means everywhere. Everywhere means anywhere. so that any space not yet occupied by the market can become a target for commercial takeover by specialists, for whom an unbranded space is an unfulfilled potential. There is no such thing as a blank state, a tabula rasa, in today's ubiquitous marketplace. Every blank space invites a brand logo or an advertising slogan. Every skin patch invites a commercial tattoo. Every silence invites a noisy come on. Marketers figure out how to hook products and brands to movies and songs, to make whole television stations advertising boards. MTV, like VH1, is a shopping network for the music industry in which we have seen Rock Around the Clock become Shop Around the Clock on 111 channels and counting worldwide. They try to enlist the five senses in every campaign, recently seizing on the idea of embedding aromas in packaging, hoping the way to the purse is through the nose, targeting as many of the five senses as possible. The most unlikely places have recently been transformed into advertising venues. A production of the musical Stomp in the Orpheum Theater in New York offered a 3-minute staged advertisement for a tourist organization called Visit London. Live commercials in live theaters, they can now be found in Dublin and Hamburg as well as Manhattan. Why? Because according to one advertiser, they're a captive audience. They can't switch channels or change over or walk out once the thing is started. And if live theater works for marketeers, why not live sheep? Hotels.nl, a Dutch online reservations firm, has been buying space on Sheep at €1 per ewe to spread its message around Holland, despite fines levied by angry local municipalities. The practice, founded by an English firm called Easy Green Productions, that puts ads on sheep blankets, is growing. As companies trade, merge, co-brand, and exchange, they try to create content monopolies over the multiple screens we nowadays watch from dawn to midnight. Those Samsung cell phone screens, so seemingly plural, are conduits to common content, and the firms that control or sponsor content seek a monopoly on that commonality. The Disney Company and its ABC broadcast subsidiary, it's partnering with Steve Jobs' Apple Computer Company to put Disney content on Apple's latest iPod video players. Their rivals, such as Google Video, which purchased YouTube at the end of 2006 for $1.6 billion, and Real Networks, compete for the same eyeballs. Every digital pipeline looking for its own monopoly over content, right around the world. And so Newsweek's race is on towards Ubiquity TV, where virtual, ad-driven watching never stops courtesy of multiplying media technologies. Wristwatch, phone, iPod, computer screen, Wi-Fi connectivity, television sets large and small, and old-fashioned movie screens. Real-world advertising has been everywhere, seemingly forever, of course. Above public urinals, aloft on blimps and biplane banners, on school bus roofs, and parking meter poles, in school and college campus student centers, on sports arena billboards, all over public transportation, and still everywhere on those old-fashioned outdoor billboards. There are more and more circuits, more wires, more pipes to deliver virtual content, but less and less pluralism of content. The internet has already entangled us in a world wide web that has become a surrogate reality. Futurologists in the mold of George Gilder have gone a step further in quest of ubiquity, imagining an electronic network built into and coterminous with the atmosphere, an ether sphere into which anyone can plug. Presto! Universal Wi-Fi absolutely everywhere. Using the nearly infinite bandwidth beyond what is commercially exploited today, no one will ever have to be offline again. We can all be hooked together into a virtual telecosmic network, through which, however, our actual connections to actual publics are obliterated. Web games target youth, but players abound in every generation. Millions of kidult gamers participating in persistent, permanently on and available to players who log on, online games. A 54-year-old online player of Star Wars Galaxies complained when the manufacturer changed the format and rules that it had ruined the wonderful second life together she and fellow gamesters had developed, destroying, in the words of the story's reporter, a camaraderie and friendship with other players that were far more important than the play itself, relationships that can be hard to replicate in real life. Other distraught players complained of feeling violated by the format changes. One gamester saying, "For them to just come along and destroy our community has prompted a lot of death in the family type grieving." When a gamester's virtual life takes precedence over an adult's actual life, it is hard to imagine that our real civic or social communities are being benefited. Gilder's version of a ubiquitous telecosm is no futurologist fantasy. In October 2005, Philadelphia chose Earthlink to build and manage a wireless network spanning the entire city. Chicago, Miami Beach, Milwaukee, and Portland, Oregon are also exploring municipal wireless networks, and Google recently offered to make all of San Francisco wireless for free. Well, not exactly free, but to be paid for by advertisements targeting users. Around the world, where many countries, including South Korea, Canada, Israel, and Japan, already have a greater percentage of their population with access to broadband than the United States, which now ranks 16th in broadband access, public wireless networks are likely to prove even more seductive. Consumers will deem this progress since it will appear to enhance their capacity to communicate, buy and sell, and access entertainment. But so will marketers, who will understand that the telecosm offers them ubiquitous access to customers and endless possibilities for marketing. Here and there, an artist or a dissident will use universal access to call out crowds into the streets to make a happening or foment a demonstration. But the dominant use of and economic purpose behind the telecosm are necessarily commercial. The aim of those who finance and establish it is to use the customers who think they are using it. The new media advertise their pull capacities. Tell us what you want. We are here to empower you. But their viability depends on their push capabilities, their success at selling products, services, entertainment, knowledge, and other stuff. Born of competition and rooted in entrepreneurship, consumer markets today have become monsters of monomania, with everything for sale. The title of a book by Robert Kuttner on markets. Rival spheres come under attack, and government stands impeached and impoverished along with democratic politics itself. There is only one paradigm. Unfettered markets are deemed both the essence of human liberty and the most expedient route to prosperity. And hence, but one value, profit, one activity, shopping, one identity, the consumer, one paradigm of behavior, market exchange, one life world, commerce, that qualify as legitimate. Unsuspecting subscribers to what probably is America's most prestigious magazine, The New Yorker, must have read their August 22, 2005 issue with growing puzzlement. For there were hundreds of red and white peppermint targets everywhere on the cover, in the reading matter, among the ads, and threaded into the layout and design right into the back cover. The New Yorker had discovered co-branding. The wealthy wannabe market discount firm, Target, facetiously pronounced in the French fashion as Target, had purchased this issue of the actually upmarket New Yorker from cover to cover for $1.1 million, a singular monopoly on advertising that intruded on layout and design of the magazine and obscured the traditional boundary between advertising and editorial content. Well-known illustrators such as Milton Glasser, Ruben Toledo, and Robert Risco offered drawings as part of what the New Yorker called its project. For that week at least, Target was the New Yorker, and the New Yorker was Target. Their brands merged, their logos married, their content intertwined. For one moment in time, under cover of design ingenuity and creative advertising, in a single magazine at least, a retail company had achieved advertising ubiquity. Only Pravda, the official newspaper of the Communist Party in its Soviet heyday, could boast such total penetration, except that its relationship to the party was always fully acknowledged. 2. Omnipresence. The consumer market aspires to be everywhere, but it also wishes to be ever-present, occupying time with the same fierceness that it conquers space. In modern consumer societies, the store is never closed, the pitchman is never silent, and the opportunity to engage in market exchange is never suspended. This is a kind of reverse Sharia in which the rules of every competing social sector, whether religious or political, are overwritten by the rules governing shopping. Islamic Sharia, like Puritanism with its Sunday blue laws, might decree no shopping on the Sabbath, or no alcohol or dancing permitted ever. Market Sharia decrees no shopping days permitted, stores permanently open, and alcohol and dancing and everything else that can be bought, permitted, encouraged, ordained, everywhere and always. Shops and malls that once were open 5 or 6 days a week now are open 7 days a week, with added hours on selected evenings and holidays, and early openings 5 or 6 in the morning, even 1 minute past midnight. On those special shopping days like Black Friday, as in profitable or in the black, right after Thanksgiving on a day when nearly 10% of all holiday purchases are now made in the United States. Many at pre-dawn morning sales. Electronic Mondays, Get Your Gadgets on Sale, has recently followed Black Friday as the season's second most rewarding shopping day. Religious holidays from Christmas and Easter to Passover and Ramadan have joined together like holidays like Halloween and Kwanzaa and Valentine's Day as occasions for commerce that spread across ethnic and national boundaries. Their holiness an excuse only to stop working, producing, in order to ramp up consuming. In a front-page post-Thanksgiving story, in languaging mimicking the hysteria that accompanied reports on Hurricane Katrina, the New York Times recently reported, across the country, millions of Americans mobbed discount stores, raced into suburban malls, and swarmed downtown shopping districts in a retail ritual that appeared to set a record for sleep deprivation. As if he foresaw the actual breakdown of civilization in the antics of his marauding customers, lonely early morning Black Friday store clerk featured in the story is seen trying to control a mob of shoppers, clutching for cut-rate computer hardware, shouting, "Civilized, civilized," over and over again, even as customers continuously lunged at one another for a share of the booty. The aim of this frenzied all-night market, door-busting, is commercial omnipresence, an environment of total shopping. To measure commercialism's contemporary omnipresence is to chart the actual minutes and hours spent each day by Americans or Germans or Japanese during which they are exposed to commercial media messaging and invited to identify themselves in terms of what they buy and eat and drink and wear. The numbers as they impact on the young are particularly daunting. Measured by the time allotted to them, commercialism's pedagogical competitors, education, parenting, socialization by church or civic group, come out on the short side. Teachers struggle for the attention of their students for at most 20 or 30 hours a week, perhaps 30 weeks a year in settings they do not fully control, and in institutions that are often ridiculed in the popular media. Animal House has become a more popular emblem of the modern university than the ivory tower. Pastors, rabbis, imams, and priests get an hour or two a week with that ever smaller minority of their congregations that actually attend services. Parents are embattled gatekeepers at best, who year by year watch their hold on their children compromised, eroded, outflanked, and eventually wholly loosened by their rivals in the marketplace, who often target them as impediments standing in the way of access to children, or try to exploit them as conduits to children. The true tutors of late consumer capitalist society as measured by time are those who control the media monopolies, the aggressive content purveyors, shameless lords of the omnipresent pixels who capture 60 or 70 hours a week, 52 weeks a year of children's time and attention. The Kaiser Family Foundation's 2005 survey of 8 to 18-year-old American youngsters found that the total amount of media content young people are exposed to each day has risen to 8.5 hours. In an attention-deficit modern society, this is as oppressive of a temporal totalism as can be imagined, one in which the commercial branders and love-mark propagandists control our civilization's commercial ethos by controlling time itself, with direct and indirect spending by young people 18 and under in the U.S. accounting for roughly $1 trillion a year. Marketers necessarily become subversive adversaries of adulthood, who inculcate puerility in the young, from tots to teens to dumbed-down adults, in the name of maintaining market viability. The culture of puerility legitimates it all in part simply by owning the clock. To own the clock is not always to display it, Malls are stubborn in their disdain for clocks and manage to own time by operating outside its discipline. If shoppers do not know what time it is, they can never spend too much of it on shopping. A mall with a public clock is as rare as a train station without one. The now notorious 24/7 news cycle that puts all news all the time on dozens of cable channels, internet stations, and satellite radio and television transmissions announces that news time is all the time. All the time is another way to achieve no time at all. The original meaning of the news was to convey a sense that from time to time something new happens that merits a news report. All news all the time is no longer news at all, but commercial infotainment geared to commerce rather than to information. The then executive vice president of scheduling at CBS acknowledged the obvious that in a hyperactive society with so many choices, viewers are used to being entertained every minute. To maximize content while using up more and more of the day and still retaining the focus of attention deficit kids, content providers must dumb down, speed up, fast cut, and jump cut, putting a premium on speed, see Chapter 3, and a preference for repetition. For these purposes, 24/7 is inadequate. There are literally not enough hours in the day for a totalizing consumer culture that needs to fill every available second of psychological time to overspill capacity. In responding to multiple technologies, young people are developing multi-track minds that accommodate multi-track media, adding hours to the clock. A successful marketing strategy must think bigger than 24 hours a day. A study commissioned by Yahoo from OMD Worldwide found that by exploiting the multitasking typical of fast-moving young people, it is possible to get members of the My Media generation to fit up to 44 hours of activities in just one day. In an infantilist culture, time itself is elastic. For electronic gadgetry like TiVo and iPods allow consumers to time shift their consumption of content. Hence, young people can respond to advertisements about gear on their television screens, the home shopping network, even as they research comparative pricing on another channel, Googling stuff, and buzz market stuff to friends on still another channel, iMessaging them. A 3-for-1 multitasking that lets them do an hour's consumer labor in 20 minutes. This is not some trick of Einstein's special relativity theory. In the cyclotron of marketing, desires can be propelled to speeds that exceed the speed of light, after which anything is possible. The younger the target consumer, the more effective the assault on time. While adults can mute, filter, or otherwise elude or ignore advertising, the first survey of American children by MediaMark Research, Inc. has found that children differ from adults in one way that should interest advertisers. Most of them aren't skipping TV ads. They do not mute their sets during ads, and they do not time shift out of commercial space as adults do. Nearly 60% of 5,400 6 to 11-year-olds said they watched ads the same way they watched programs. Commercials themselves have a timeless quality, merging with television, web-based, and video game content, to digest more and more of a typical child's daily schedule. American television ads today eat up 8 minutes of a sitcom and 16 minutes of a drama. Executives are dropping song-themed lead-ins and credits to make still more time for commercials, since the younger demographic may not even recognize the difference between commercials and content. The two have become commingled in children's programming, something we have already observed. The Target's campaign in The New Yorker achieved for adults. Singular content such as a Nike swoosh can appear on marathon runner sweats in a race being watched by a kid with a Nike swoosh knit yarmulke while he downloads a clever Nike commercial onto his iPod. The commercial time-space continuum is expendable. Its eyes are those glowing diodes that stare at us day and night, green or red, peering optics that are always on even when the gadgets they sign for are off. Reminders that the commercial time-space continuum is never off, only hibernating or paused, or, if you try to turn them off, like your computer, recycling into the restart mode, waiting, ever ready for you to log on again and get on with the consumer's virtual life. Like all other systems of the market economy, the selling system default mode is set permanently to opt-in. There is no opt-in switch. You are in until you opt out. Except there is no opt-out switch either, so you are forever in. This is a kind of passing consuming, a system mode which, like car restraints and safety cushions, works without the will or input of the user. The market economy is in user mode all the time, and deploys wares and marketing without the consumer having to do anything at all. A perfect selling machine. When new technologies are introduced, they are introduced to replicate in new media the same old commercial messages and the same old message monopolies. With each new medium, writes family finance expert Nathan Dungan, there is one more outlet for advertisers to reach people, especially impressionable young people. An illusion of diversity based on technological variety covers up the actual homogeneity of content, whether commercial or merely commercially sponsored. In 1996, a new deregulatory Federal Communications Act was passed, supplanting the 1934 Act. It was precisely the logic of technical spectrum abundance that motivated deregulation and rationalized the emphasis on market activity. Though the reality was that control of content was narrowing in a world of vertical integration and global media monopolies. More and more time and more space for a less and less varied content. Broadband originally held out the promise of greater variety. Every television channel yielded increased transmission time capacity by a factor of 6. But digitalizing broadcast spectra so that one old analog station can yield 6 digital channels does little to increase the variety or cultural diversity of content. Changing the format for the mechanical electronic reproduction of music from roller tubes to player piano to 78, 45, and LP vinyl records, and then to tape and disc and iPod download has done little to increase the variety of music consumed. There may be more variety, but format change has not been the spur. Likewise, digitalization has done little for diversifying content. Cable television and satellite radio offer dozens of different varieties of music, but the economics of recording and the monopoly ownership of telecommunications companies continue to shrink musical taste. What can be heard, an extraordinary variety, has little impact on what people actually listen to, a narrow spectrum, so that the potential pluralism of the technological architecture is unrepresented in the public's listening habits. Likewise, showing movies on cell phone or iPod screens does not release viewers from Hollywood's comic book blockbuster approach to films, but secures it over viewers 24/7. Whereas, according to media critic Jody Cantor, the traditional large-screen television is meant to cut a neat hole in your day. During the time you watch a movie or a game or news at the day's end, small-screen television fills that ragged holes that already exist in your routine. The 37-minute train to work, the 6-minute line at Starbucks, the stretches spent in the bathroom. What she does not notice is that the moments of time occupied by these ragged holes represents what up until now have been the moments that have eluded commercial media omnipresence. Filling the ragged holes secures the media's temporal monopoly. There is no longer anywhere to hide. iPod and cell phone, wireless network and telecosm are everywhere with you. There is no longer any moment in which to take sanctuary. Time belongs to the market. 3. Addictiveness. Another indicator of the totalizing and homogenizing character of consumer culture is its apparent addictiveness. Addictive behavior places the addictive object in the forefront of both consciousness and subconsciousness in a manner that can obliterate rival interests. In the first instance, it is a medical and psychological issue. But in a hyper-consumer society, it has a cultural and economic dimension, as is apparent in this technology's experts' comment on a 4-year-old playing a video game. Who was so excited about finding words in the maze that she got addicted, in an arcadish way, to the game? My use of the term addiction is not metaphoric. Addiction is Ubiquity's core psychology and hence an ideal means to securing market omnipresence. For addiction leads to repetitive behavior in which the addicted subject returns to the same obsession over and over again, so that it encompasses time as well. The consumer society prospers on addictive behavior, selling tobacco, alcohol, medications, legal drugs, and of course, state-sponsored and casino, as well as online gambling, estimated to be $10 billion a year of business. In theory, because consumers want these goods, but in fact, because it is profitable to do so. Much the same is true for the selling of sugar-saturated sodas and candies, and grease-laden fast foods to the young, by helping to create desires and habits which, if not actually addictive, turn consumer desire into ad-reinforced craving. Consumer capitalism gets consumers to want the very things, become addicted to the very things it needs to sell. Do 11-month-old babies need electronic learning toys like the V-Smile video game console or the handheld Leapster game system? Do babies want Baby Einstein and Brainy Baby videos or Baby First TV programming to while away the hours when they turn 6 months old? What is clear is that the firms that make these learning toys and educational programs need to sell them, and want parents to believe that unless they buy the educational cartridges the marketers call smartridges that turn game time into brain time, their kids will fail in life. The V-Smile was named Best Toy of the Year by the 2005 Toy Industry Trade Show, and is marketed under ad copy reading, "You'll never get into college if you don't play your video games." Business spends over $11 billion a year in its advertising assault on children, teens, and young adults. Some of this is to sell about $20 billion a year in toys, and alarmingly, marketers are now introducing digital music players and digital cameras for 3-year-olds. "Mommy, help me download Farmer and Adele to my MP3 player," proclaims a New York Times news headline. The greater proportion of the sum continues to be spent by the food, beverage, candy, and restaurant industry, whose aim, if not quite addiction, is not only brand loyalty, but sugar, salt, and grease dependency. Fast food chains vie for the super burger record, with Hardee's 1,400-calorie monster-thick burger and Wendy's 1,000-calorie triple cheeseburger trumped by Ruby Tuesday's 1,780-calorie ultimate colossal burger. Meanwhile, Pizza Hut boasts a full house extra-large pizza with 2,240 calories. Schools are equipped with vending machines that sell sugar-rich sodas, with cola companies offering some percentage of the take as a bribe to school systems to overcome resistance based on the health of children. It is not exactly addiction that is at stake, but the American Beverage Association knows it has hardwired America to drown the salt and grease with sugar. The food and beverage industries continue to introduce new products aimed at children. In 1994, only 50 new food products were developed for kids. 10 years later, in 2004, 470 new products were introduced, a rate far greater than that for the increase of new products in the total market. Alcohol, naturally addictive, is also heavily marketed to the young. Binge drinking has become a peril on university campuses across the world, and in the United States it finds commercial sponsorship in extensive television beer advertising geared to teen taste. Girls, gags, and geeks mixed in with talking turtles, as well as in the new fashion of collegiate drinking games like beer pong, in which contestants try to throw ping pong balls into beer cups, with the losers being compelled to guzzle beer. Anheuser-Busch introduced a Bud Pong game in 2005, promoting Bud Pong tournaments and providing Bud Pong tables, balls, and glasses to distributors in 47 markets, including college towns like Oswego, New York, and Clemson, South Carolina. Outrageous websites, not beer company sponsored, however, with names such as www.collegedrunkfest.com, feature rules, merchandise, and pictures of wild parties with some students naked and others hugging the toilet. The site is a kind of unending virtual spring break venue made up in equal parts of porn and foolishness, all explicitly linked to heavy drinking. Breweries and distributors are themselves more prudent, offering a responsible drinking text for their marketing. but the irresponsible subtext is teen consumption, binge drinking, passive athletic spectatorship, and alcohol-induced sex, featured in dozens of online porn sites portraying putatively drunk women engaged in forced sex and simulated rape. Addiction is a clinical term, and many observers use it in speaking of consumer behavior. But even without invoking it, we can task the consumer market with an ambition to attach every natural human need to an artificial commercial product, so that for the need to be fulfilled, the product must be purchased. The aim is commodity-based addiction. Day and night, omnipresence is a synonym for addiction. No sleep without Ambien, and no wakefulness without no-DAWs. No passive evening spectatorship without TV, and no midday athletic prowess without all the right gear. No nighttime colds without NyQuil, and no daytime sniffles without DayQuil. Every mental and emotional state demands a commercial facilitator, ideally one on which a dependency can be bred. Think of a typical young man's evening out at the local mall sports bar. No cool without Ralph Lauren, no hookup without Nokia, no fun without Bud, no buzz without nicotine, no pickup without Heineken, no chat without the overhead bar TV screen, no gateway without the Miata, no Muzak without Boss, no high-thread count sheets without Martha Stewart, no intercourse without Viagra, and no see ya without the trumped-up buddy call on Verizon. Even the big-ticket items in the third world call for big-ticket commercial facilitators. No war without Blackwater, no democratization without Halliburton, no reconstruction without Bechtel. Eventually, the generics become indistinguishable from the brands, so that it becomes redundant to mention both. Pepsi means youth. Kodak means memories. Hummer means macho. Sony means games. iPod means music. Microsoft means computers. Google means knowledge. And Nike means sports. Children once skipped rope, played house, hopscotch, said Simon, sticked ball, and otherwise entertained themselves with more or less whatever the living environment, conditioned by their imaginations, could offer up. Today, play is commodity facilitated and consumer sponsored. A question of expensive gear, electronic video games, internet entertainment, all the right equipment regularly re-engineered in new and improved versions that demand constant repurchase and have the potential to induce addiction. Youthful consumers get hooked on the gear and the peripherals, if not the games. Addiction itself is commodity-based. No addiction therapy without web-based health sites and self-help books and novel medications aimed at depression or bipolarity or anorexia or the latest illness of the week that can be associated with addiction. To need and to shop become synonymous. I shop, therefore I am. Wails April Lane Benson, editor of the self-consciously Cartesian Takeoff, subtitled Compulsive Buying and the Search for Self. Apple computers are thus being sold under the slogan, What G4 are you? And even Porsche is blurring the boundaries between consumer choice and what sounds like addiction. Suddenly, the line between want and need seems so arbitrary, runs the tagline for Porsche's new Cayman S, a car also featured in the television series The Sopranos, followed by this afterthought, priorities give way to pure desire. What this means is that for every discretionary want converted into a pure desire need, $1 is somewhere earned. And for every need converted into an addiction identified, $2 are earned over and over again, one for the addictive purchase and the second for the addiction treatment. The idea is a market economy that dominates every other human sector by making other sectors dependent on consumption for their enjoyment. Recreational gear, workplace gear, arts gear, educational gear, even religious gear, define an all-encompassing marketplace. An iPod costs what an inexpensive guitar does, but the guitar is a one-time expense that can lead to a lifetime of music making, whereas the iPod, a one-time expenditure that can lead to a lifetime of shopping. iPod upgrades, music downloads, headset enhancements, and so on. Since consumerism aspires to a world in which people are consumers all the time, addiction is commerce-friendly. Addiction to consumer products, to gear and peripherals, and to games and goods is good. But addiction to consumerism itself, to shopping, is better. Compulsive shopping is certainly more today than a rhetorical phrase or a tired shopper's joke. A Stanford University study reports that up to 8% of Americans, 23.6 million people, suffer from compulsive shopping disorder, an affliction associated with out-of-control spending that rips apart relationships and plunges consumers into overwhelming debt and bankruptcy. Googling terms such as shopping addiction and Shopaholism turns up hundreds of help sites, dozens of books, mostly of the self-help variety, and a growing medical literature that extends all the way to Russia and China. The figure of 24 million compulsive shoppers in America suggests something approaching a pandemic. Except that in the medical lexicon of consumerism, the addict is not an aberration, but a product of the marketing industry. Addiction is not a pathology in need of therapy, but an industry ambition calling for reinforcement. The infantilist ethos is itself, at least in some part, an ethos of addiction. And the 24 million strong American compulsive shopping vanguard suggests that the ambition has succeeded, not just metaphorically, but clinically. The Illinois-based Proctor Hospital runs an addiction recovery program, the Illinois Institute for Addiction Recovery, that, among more traditional varieties of addiction, such as drug dependency and alcoholism, for example, also treats compulsive shopping or spending. The IIAR at Proctor counsels on its website, may result in interpersonal, occupational, family, and financial problems in one's life. In many ways, the consequences of this behavior are similar to that of any other addiction. Impairment in relationships may occur as a result of excessive spending and efforts to cover up debt or purchases. Persons who engage in compulsive shopping or spending may become preoccupied with that behavior and spend less and less time with important people in their lives. They may experience anxiety or depression as a result of the spending or shopping, which may interfere with work or school performance. This is a lucid definition of how a totalizing consumer economy can come to dominate consciousness. Most therapy programs naturally treat shopping addiction as a psychological illness. The IIAR Proctor Hospital is unusual in that it acknowledges there are social and cultural factors at work that tend to increase the addictive potential of shopping and spending, which include the easy availability of credit and the material focus of society in general. These factors encourage people to accumulate possessions now and worry about financial responsibility later. Highlighting the branded identity theme raised in earlier chapters of this book, the IIAR also notes that society places a strong emphasis on one's outer appearance, and many media personalities promote spending money to achieve a certain look that will bring about happiness. The IIAR at Proctor website also cites online shopping and cable shopping shows which allow items to be purchased and ordered by express delivery to arrive quickly without the buyer having to leave the house or personally interact with anyone else. Other web-based therapy groups, PriorityHealthcare.com, Medscape's WebMD.com, and HypnosisDownloads.com, for example, also see shopping addiction as psychological. Thus, the Yahoo Health website for shopping addiction offers a typical self-help support group rooted in web chat that eschews any discussion of the culture of commerce, an indication of the daunting challenge of distinguishing addiction from normal shopping behavior, even to well-meaning health groups like the one on Yahoo. Is, the site's note, reminding visitors that this group is not for people who like to shop and want to chat about purchases. This is for people who have a problem. Perhaps the difference is not so obvious. Robert D. Manning, a serious and scholarly critic of the place of credit in the United States, has even suggested that dependency on credit has itself become addictive, as is evident from the subtitle of his book, Credit Card Nation: The Consequences of America's Addiction to Credit. If the web is a source of therapy, it also creates its own addictive pathology. In Redmond, Washington, the home of Microsoft, a company called Internet Computer Addiction Services is a pioneer in a growing niche in mental health care, and addiction recovery. Skeptics may believe that obsessive internet use does not exact the same toll on health or family life as conventionally recognized addictions. However, there are mental health professionals who support a diagnosis of internet addiction, and who argue that a majority of obsessive users are online to further addictions to gambling or pornography, or have become much more dependent on those vices because of their prevalence on the internet. Addiction is not just an American phenomenon. A byproduct of American hyperbole and the American penchant for medicalizing cultural problems and dealing with them through self-help programs. In the United Kingdom, the website www.addictions.co.uk cites a 1998 Mintel marketing study that reports almost 1 in 4 Britons admit being addicted to shopping, with twice as many women as men, saying that they frequently set off a shopping expedition even though they had nothing specific in mind to buy. This help site says shopping addiction is more than just a kind of retail therapy in which people treat other disorders and unpleasant realities with the buzz that shopping can bring. Real shopping addiction, however, results in an overwhelming sense of shame, remorse, and guilt, accompanied by feelings of hopelessness and helplessness, and leads not only to despair, but often to still more addictive behavior, resulting in more self-destructive feelings. These in turn generate high levels of debt, fear of discovery, and retribution, leading to more denial and desperate acts to cover up the behavior. For those closely connected to the sufferer, life becomes frightening and unpredictable, with a growing sense of uselessness, and the belief that the sufferer is deliberately causing chaos, and a feeling of desperation sets in. In Russia, which has shivered through a 15-year consumer capitalism cold shower, all consumerism all the time, and has established little in the way of mitigating democracy, Shopaholism has also become a well-publicized problem. An essay in the Russian online magazine Pravda reports that shopping addiction is a mental and spiritual disorder that is now common mostly with women, one that has recently been shaping up as an epidemic. The piece cites researchers, who include the psychologist Nadezhda Yugurina, who have found out that about 20% of German women acknowledge their insupportable desire to buy something all the time. The piece offers undocumented claims suggested that the addiction has conquered 40% of American women, whereas 52% of British females said they found shopping a lot more enjoyable than sex. The author is more prudent about Russia itself, writing that there is no such statistic data as far as Russian women are concerned, although the passion for shopping has been developing in Russia steadily. Unsurprising then, shopping addiction appears to be as global as shopping itself, for while it is widely recognized as a pathology of advanced market society, it may be that it is in fact simply market society itself writ large. The perfect image of its defining ethos, hiding behind a rather flimsy screen of self-deprecation, to the degree addiction still counts as a pejorative. The infantilizing aspects of shopaholism seem clear enough. Therapists report that they are seeing a growing number of teenagers and young adults as patients who grew up spending hours on the computer playing games and sending instant messages. These patients appear to have significant developmental problems, including attention deficit disorder and a lack of social skills. Addiction to video games and to online multiplayer games is not only growing, but is an implicit goal of game manufacturers. I earlier referenced Sony and LucasArts' online game Star Wars Galaxies, citing reports that changes in format and rules had led to a kind of virtual despair among the virtual players affected. The other part of the story is that the controversial changes were made expressly in order to dumb down a game thought to be too complex and text-based for younger players. Nancy McIntyre, then LucasArts senior game director, complained about the original game that there was lots of reading, much too much, in the game. There was lots of wandering around learning about different abilities. We wanted more instant gratification. Kill, get treasure, repeat. A perfect recipe for dumbing down consumers and underwriting addiction. Kill, get treasure, repeat. Kill, get treasure, repeat. instant gratification that is ever less gratifying, and that enjoins repetition that is both endless and joyless, as well as murderous and addictive. Students of addiction agree that addicts can often be multi-addicted, say to alcohol or drugs as well as to shopping. Thus, shopaholics are often addicted not only to shopping generically, but to the media that facilitate or manifest the fruits of their shopping and that are the primary venues for the commercial ethos of infantilization. Video games, television shopping networks, and the internet itself, as well as pornography on the internet. New York Times reporter Sarah Kershaw has attributed to unnamed specialists the estimate that 6 to 10% of the approximately 189 million internet users in this country have a dependency that can be as destructive as alcoholism and drug addiction. The problem has purportedly created a growing niche in mental health care and addiction recovery under the diagnostic rubric Internet Addiction Disorder. Therapists query 15 or more discrete symptoms for the disorder, while firms advertising therapies offer 12-step programs designed specifically to treat it. At such places as the Sierra Tucson Psychiatric Hospital in Arizona, the Center for Online Addiction in Bradford, Pennsylvania, and the Illinois Institute for Addiction Recovery at Proctor Hospital in Peoria, Illinois, computer addicts mix in with more traditional populations of cocaine and alcohol abusers. McLean Hospital in Belmont, Massachusetts, one of America's oldest and most distinguished residential treatment centers for mental illness, now has a computer addiction study center in conjunction with the clinic established there in 1996. Online video games played in competition with others across the world, EverQuest, Doom 3, and World of Warcraft, as well as the Star Wars Galaxies game described above, for example, are apparently especially addictive. Perhaps because in a game like World of Warcraft, it can take up to 600 hours of play just to rise up out of the game's first levels of play and become capable of slaying the more challenging demons and monsters whose demise players aspire to. An estimated 100 million people worldwide log on each month to interactive computer games, generating subscription revenues of $3.6 billion a year. Time spent online, especially by the young, is increasingly rapidly, thanks to the game's persistent ever-readiness to serve players. The 2005 Internet in American Life project of Pew found that teenagers did spend an increasing amount of time online. 51% of teenage Internet users are online daily, up from 42% in 2000. Although Pew's study added that most teenagers maintain robust network of friends. Internet addiction converges potentially with pornography addiction, since pornography has traditionally always been potentially addictive. Whatever its medium, and on the internet it is pervasive. Conjoined with a medium that offers its own addictive solitude, pornography is thus especially troublesome. Some estimates that up to 1/3 of all internet traffic is around pornography. And addiction here has been associated with the collapse of marriages, the loss of jobs, and self-destructive behavior, including suicide. At the treatment end of addiction, therapies are offered not only for addiction, but for those whose addiction have led to crippling debt, for which groups such as Debtors Anonymous offer traditional healing and health 12-step remedial programs. Therapy can work as long as compulsive shopping and spending are defined as inappropriate, excessive, and out of control, says Donald Black, professor of psychiatry at the University of Iowa College of Medicine. Like other addictions, it basically has to do with impulsiveness and lack of control over one's impulses. In other words, the medical approach seems to argue if we are confronted with a pathology of the individual, addictive spending can be treated. But what if we face a pathology of the culture itself? What if the consumer culture that generates a response to pathological compulsive disorders and the consequences they bring, indebtedness and bankruptcy, is itself organized around and even defined by the very pathologies its therapies affect to address? Is not addiction, under such circumstances, consumption-sustaining rather than shopper-pathological? To the extent that, in Dr. Black's own phrase, shopping is embedded in our culture. The culture is unlikely to be able effectively to treat it. For The culture is directly complicit in breeding the pathologies that putatively threaten it. It is its pathologies, which cannot then be truly regarded as aberrational with respect to its ends. It is the culture itself that has become aberrational. Carolyn Wesson wants to help women who shop too much to overcome the urge to splurge. And in her self-help tome for compulsive shoppers, Olivia Mellon hopes to offer a winning plan for overspenders and their partners. But if compulsive buying is really only the mirror image of consumer capitalism's compulsive selling, and if debt is less a disease of than a desirable condition for a profitable consumer economy, then authors like Wesson and Mellon, an institution like Debtors Anonymous or the Illinois Institute for Addiction Recovery at Proctor, are unlikely to have such success. Not until the infantilist ethos itself is brought under scrutiny. The Pravda article cited earlier calls it an open secret that shopping addiction is common in the countries with stable economies, since stable economies generate more shoppers. Behind this open secret is the dirty, little, not-so-hidden secret that the cultural ethos of consumerism mandates compulsive shopping to satisfy its needs for compulsive selling. 4. Self-replication. Addiction is an effective instrument of totalizing commercialism. So is self-replication, that capacity of market entities to reproduce themselves, both virally and in other ways. In the absence of public oversight and regulation, global corporations that depend on franchising, fast food or coffee chains, aim first to establish a beachhead, then to dominate, in time to suffuse, and finally to monopolize the market in which they compete. A Starbucks, wherever coffee is consumed, no rivals. A Cafe Einstein, once a unique Berlin coffee shop, reproduced as often as possible across Berlin and then Germany. McDonald's, wherever burgers, beef, lamb, tofu, no matter, are to be eaten in a hurry. When there was a single McDonald's in Beijing, variety was served. An alternative to Chinese cuisine had established an entrepreneurial, diversifying foothold. With 10 McDonald's in the city, different neighborhoods could partake in the new variety. But with 100 outlets, now nearly 350 across China and still proliferating, diversity is diminished and franchise monopoly at the expense of pluralism becomes a growing danger. There may be a natural market limit on franchising. Some fast food chains have, at least for the time being, hit a wall. But there are no natural limits on the ambition to franchise until every sandwich consumed anywhere in Beijing or China or Asia or the world is a quick-eat Big Mac. Franchising not only aspires to a market monopoly, Coke leaves no room for Pepsi, or, for that matter, for tea, but produces homogenization and conformity. Fast food not only replicates itself through franchising, it encourages competitors in the food service business to pursue fast food, leaving less and less room for rival slow food services. Consumer malls worldwide still offer all manner of fare, from ethnically inflected fast food chains such as Pizza Hut, Wendy's, Burger King, McDonald's, Domino's Pizza, KFC, Taco Bell, and Sbarro, as well as the local Chinese and Thai chains. But finding an alternative to fast food, finger food served in a hurry to customers who stand in line to buy and stand or perch on chairs to eat fast, in general is difficult. Traditional restaurants, barring the occasional sports bar, are rarely found in the big box malls, since eating in such venues is meant to supplement shopping, a fuel stop, rather than borrow serious time from it. The point of fast food, after all, is its speed, not its recipes. The same is true for the sports shoe sector, where there is competition among brands, but little competition by alternative modes of footwear. Nearly 2/3 of the shoes sold in the world today are sports shoes, so that there is less variety around the world than ever before. T-shirts and baseball caps, as well as blue jeans and athletic shoes, are sold under a number of competing, if monopoly-aspiring, global companies. But the overall result is an emerging global youth uniform that pinches dressed tastes as effectively as MTV and VH1 constrict musical taste. Commodification is the mode by which a consumer society reproduces itself, working overtime to create uniform monopolies of taste and behavior. To commodify an object is to transform multiple meanings into a singular market meaning, namely, the potential of a good or service to be bought and sold. To commodify is thus to colonize, to impose singular meanings on multidimensional goods. Things never before considered commodities, things that were free, unlimited, or beyond the pale of human commerce, have become commodities today, writes James Ridgway. The oceans are being commodified, oil drilling. Offshore fishing rights are being auctioned. The sky, the Earth's inner and outer atmosphere, is fast becoming a commodity and sold in bits and pieces. Commodification's process is progressive and progressively corrupting to heterogeneity and the autonomy of other sectors. Companies can participate in federal programs to buy and sell air pollution rights, in effect, purchasing space in the atmosphere. Now, parts of human bodies are commodities as well, from blood to eyes, kidneys, and hair. Efforts are being made to commodify not only living things, but life itself, with biotech companies making ownership claims to genetically engineered life forms. The new electronic and digital technologies permit the ongoing commodification of communication and of knowledge itself. The vehicles that carry knowledge and entertainment and the pipes through which communication must pass are themselves commodified goods. The image is free, but the pixels by which it is reconstructed and transmitted are commodities that must be purchased. Thoughts are autonomous. Die Gedanken sind frei, proclaimed the old German student drinking freedom song. But when packaged, reproduced, and marketed, they are but one more kind of commodity. The Internet is a particularly powerful reproducer of consumerism because of its technical capacity to reproduce digital information, and both spread and preserve such information permanently, try to erase an email and its many ghostly shadows, or eradicate all traces of a website visit on your computer, and it becomes clear that decommodification and decolonization are far more daunting than the colonizing process to which they respond. The computer virus is a useful metaphor for at least one powerful characteristic of commodification: the way in which it not only puts its character at the center, but removes characteristics and identities that were in place prior to infection. Like those multiplying pop ads that efface other underlying images on your computer screen, commodified goods dominate our landscape. Like a virus that may reproduce what is a quite innocent message over and over again until it erases all other message content, and becomes something other than innocent. Commodification works to transform many kinds of goods and services into sellable commodities whose core meaning is their consumability. They can be bought for a price. Marcuse tried to capture the meaning of commodities in the cultural sector this way. If mass communications blend together harmoniously and often unnoticeably, art, politics, religion, and philosophy with commercials, they bring these realms of culture to their common denominator, the commodity form. Like a cancer, commodification does not so much kill as crowd out other meanings and values, so that exchange value, not truth value or any other kind, counts. What is the tumor but the single mutating cell run amok, reproducing itself over and over again, oblivious to what it may be destroying on the way to a successful reproduction? Television takes over our entertainment sector, crowding out theater and movies. The internet and broadband crowd out television. Normal use becomes abnormal, and then obsessive, and finally addictive. All the while, consumer capitalism triumphs, seemingly a benign engine of the market sector. Yet, its endless capacity for self-replication ultimately destroys alternative sectors and thus erodes variety. 5. Omnilegitimacy. I have wrestled with the terms totalitarian and totalizing because they are freighted with history's heaviest baggage. Yet the more straightforward terms I have used to depict consumer totalism, ubiquity, omnipresence, addiction, and viral self-replication suggest a reality that is perilous enough. What the infantilist ethos succeeds in doing is to rationalize and justify these terms, turning them into acceptable conditions for consumer capitalism's flourishing. Commerce everywhere and all the time enhances our freedom. Addiction is merely a sign of how fervently we want something to which, after all, we surely have a right. Franchising and self-replication manifest and prove the success of a product. The real purpose of an ethos now becomes apparent: to legitimate the structured features and behaviors capitalism depends upon that might otherwise be thwarted or rejected, if other value systems were pursued: religious, political, civic, artistic. To be compelling, a market society that boasts a theory of pluralism must in practice either obscure its bottom-up forms of coercion or try to legitimate the actual absence of diversity. Legitimation, to lean again on Horkheimer and Adorno's more abstract formulation, often takes the form of a circle of manipulation and retroactive need in which the unity of the system grows ever stronger. The ubiquity of commerce must be made to seem a good thing, a widening of our realm of discretion. Addiction must be renamed, authorized, made to seem benign, associated with need satisfaction, for example. Homogeneity must be reformulated as healthy value consensus, for example. A cultural ethos that successfully places consuming at its core and shuts out rival spheres must seem to be justified in doing so, and not just in purely economic or instrumental terms. It must be okay. As the fatuous title of an earlier rationalization of a certain kind of commercial ethos puts it, I'm okay, you're okay. This is, of course, precisely the goal of marketing: to impose an omnilegitimacy of good feeling and appropriate sentiment not only on the products and brands it services, but on the marketing process by which it achieves its goal. Marketing itself needs branded legitimacy, the legitimacy of branding, to succeed. The logic described in Chapter 5, where loyalty and love are attributed to goods and services in order to endow mere material products with the virtues of a higher spirit, becomes a legitimizing logic when applied to marketing itself and to the consumer culture marketing rationalizes. When Marcuse wrote about one-dimensional men, he was getting at the character of a society that constrained freedom through voluntary compliance, where an economic order could prevail in the absence of terror, courtesy of a pre-established harmony between individual needs and socially required desires, goals, and aspirations. And when he identified today's novel feature as the flattening out of the antagonism between culture and social reality through the obliteration of the oppositional, alien, and transcendent elements in the higher culture, he was portraying the workings of a cultural ethos which does not so much reject oppositional values as work toward their wholesale incorporation into the established order through their reproduction and display on a massive scale. Marcuse's analysis, preoccupied with libido, explained the Mao jackets which, at the height of the anti-Western cultural revolution in China, became fashion accessories in the couture houses of Paris and Rome. It made sense out of the Che Guevara and Black Panther radical chic that fascinated upmarket matrons in Beverly Hills and Manhattan's East Side. Matrons whose fortunes successful revolution would obviously obliterate. 30 to 40 years later, the cultural ethos treats with oppositional values, whether aesthetic, religious, moral, or civic, by turning them into play, and by turning adults into grasping children with aggressively trivializing tastes. Holding market culture together through branded wants and manufactured desires allows consumer marketing to separate us from one another through privatization, even as it forges a faux commonality and consensus through common branding. The passive, quasi-addicted children who emerge as archetypical consumers are less one-dimensional than no-dimensional, because such identity as they possess is entirely heteronymous, a product of what is bought, eaten, worn, and imbibed. This is not really identity at all, but merely a coat worn to cover nakedness. I am my Mercedes. I am my Apple. I am my Big Mac. I am my Nikes. I am my MTV. We are our cars. We are our computers. We are what we eat and wear and watch. The end effect of the ethos is the eradication of significant differences among consumers. People who, inasmuch as they are consumers, are clones. Diversity? Sure, says the market. Whatever. As the hold of consumer grows, what Horkheimer and Adorno used to call mass culture becomes even less diverse. Under monopoly, all mass culture is identical, they wrote long ago, and the lines of its artificial framework begin to show through. The people at the top are no longer so interested in concealing monopoly, as its violence becomes more open, so its power grows. Movies and radio need no longer pretend to be art. The truth that they are just business is made into an ideology in order to justify the rubbish they deliberately produce. They call themselves industries. Marxism has long since gone under as a socio-economic system and, for most people, even as a critical perspective. But Horkheimer and Adorno were less Marxists than they were astute sociologists portraying mass culture. Non-Marxists and anti-Marxists reached their conclusions by different roads. Cultural critic Neil Postman contrasts George Orwell and Aldous Huxley on the way to trying to depict the real danger of the kind of mass conformity manufactured by the culture industries. No big brother is required to deprive people of their autonomy, maturity, and history, as Aldous Huxley saw it. People will come to adore the technologies that undo their capacities to think. What Orwell feared were those who would ban books. What Huxley feared was that there would be no reason to ban a book, for there would be no one who wanted to read one. The infantilist ethos generates nightmares more attuned to Huxley than to Orwell. Orwell feared those who would deprive us of information. Huxley feared those who would give us so much that we would be reduced to passivity and egoism. Orwell feared that the truth would be concealed from us. Huxley feared the truth would be drowned in a sea of irrelevance. Fortunately, we are not yet fully propelled into Huxley's nightmare. Other powerful forms of identity continue to rival consumer identity. Unfortunately, many of those identities arise out of anti-modern descriptive identities drawn from religious fundamentalism and ethnic extremism. Jihadic identities of the kind that were the subject of my Jihad versus McWorld. Totalization generates its own contraries, just as conformity spawns rebellion. Nonetheless, consumer capitalism in the grip of marketing continues to risk totalization and homogeneity. The question is whether it is possible to prevent the infantilist ethos from succeeding, to impede its course toward a further totalism and privatization, to loosen the hold of marketing and branding on identity, to overcome the civic schizophrenia that has made it so difficult for constructive citizens to work together to overcome the destructive impulses of consumers when acting alone. For those seeking resistance to totalism, conformity, and privatization, and trying to stimulate opposition to the infantilist ethos itself, it does not help that what were once the most important systemic alternatives to consumer capitalism have self-destructed. As real-world societies and as cultural paradigms, socialism, social democracy, communism, and anarchism have gained little historical traction. Although these paradigms, because they were wedded in theory to equality and justice, are cousins to liberalism, the practices they founded in revolutions, movements, and actual regimes were mostly disastrous. The revolutions ended in failure or tyranny, the movements and parties in hypocrisy and dictatorship, and the regimes in one-party totalitarian dictatorships. These failures, above all, the collapse of the Soviet communism, while good for those who had to live under them, and better yet, for the history of liberty, have been bad for capitalism in one crucial sense: in the absence of alternatives. Capitalism's successes have bred triumphalism and eroded meaningful self-criticism. They have blinded neoliberals and liberals alike to the subtle perils inherent in markets and led them to try to remedy the vices of big government by attacking the virtues of the democratic public. The failure of communism has been mistaken for proof of capitalism's merit, even its invisibility. Is resistance to the infantilist ethos possible? Are there significant forms of rebellion and opposition already in place despite the infantilist ethos? Can they be made effective? Is there a civic therapy that can treat the civic schizophrenia that afflicts liberty in market societies? The power of dialectic, opposites arising out of the very contradictions against which they rebel, suggests that there might be.